Can you hear me now? Yes, okay. I forgot I muted the mic. Can you hear me now? Yes, okay. I forgot I muted the mic. Alright. Can you hear me now? Yes, okay. I forgot I muted the mic. So just throw Cheeto Box over here. Alright. Can you hear me now? So just throw Cheeto Box over here. Can you hear me now? Yes, okay. So just throw Cheeto Box over here. Alrighty. I think I got the looped audio started or fixed. Alright, so Lakash or Lakshmi, I there we go. I apologize if I butcher your name, but Lakshmi Anesh asked good resin to start with, and good settings to make a simple chess piece. So I personally use the Elegoo Gray for 90% of my prints, and that's just due to the high quality I get. Let's pull back so that focuses. And that's just due to the high quality that I get when printing. I mean, the Elegoo Gray by default picks up a lot of detail. Um, so I would definitely say it's a good starter resin. Um, the test print that comes with the Mars is actually the two rooks. Uh, and the fun thing about the two rooks is you're either going to get a rook that's going to print the text backwards, or you're going to get a rook that's going to print the text correctly. Um, and so it's kind of like an obligation that if you when you do that first test print, you have to post online because everybody wants to know if it's going to be backwards or not. And so generally that rook is actually what has become the de facto standard for default print settings when you start slicing in Cheeto Box. Um, just because those rooks come out amazing, and so it's kind of become the starting point from where you dial in your printer. So just to kind of show you what I'm using. Um, There we go. So I print a lot of stuff at a 0.1 layer height. Uh, that's just kind of my personal thing. I like prints to go fast. Um, and so for my 0.1 layer height, I'm using 5 bottom layers, an exposure time of 9, and 65-second bottom layers. The other thing that I do is I hollow all my bigger prints. If it's a larger print, um, I'm trying to generally save cost there. So I hollow it, throw some drain holes in, and then most of the time I use anti-aliasing. And if I use anti-aliasing, I generally do 8. It just, to me, it gives the best print quality. Um, so as far as most people starting off, they're going to be printing at usually a 0.05 layer height. So what's great is that for a 0.05 layer height for starter settings, this is all I recommend. So you'd set that to a 0.05 layer height. You can keep your exposure time at 9. I believe the default for the rooks is 8. Uh, I personally, with the batch of grade that I'm using, which was produced on August 23rd of this year, I found that it works best at roughly 9 seconds. I get the best space, positive and negative detail space possible. And then for 0.05 layer height, I just do a 30-second bottom exposure time with that Elegoo Gray. Works wonders. Um, and then you can choose to either hollow out your structure or not. You don't necessarily have to. It's up to you. Um, and if you're printing minis, I would definitely recommend turning on anti-aliasing. You pick up more detail that way, and the print comes out a lot smoother. The other big thing is that when you slice an object, there's going to be some settings that you can change at the very end, and those are located right here. And so when you slice your setting, or when you slice your part, the very first time you do a slice, you're going to want to change your lift speed to 300 millimeters a minute, as well as your retract speed to 300 millimeters a minute. It's going to save you a lot of time on your prints, as well as I've just kind of found it's the optimal. It's what the Rook uses, um, and so it works. Um, and so that I personally recommend it to everybody. That's what I've had the most success with. Um, I noticed I had a lot more failed prints using the default retract and lift speed. And since making that one minor change, I've only had one print fail, and that was just because I was really tired when I sliced it, and there was too much suction. Um, so definitely do that. Another big thing is with your supports, and I learned this one from Yordi Alcade. He prints a lot. Um, he he showed me this cool little trick. So if you change your contact depth on your supports to uh, there we go. If you change your contact depth on your supports to zero point 0.2 for the top, and then where's the other one? For the top and the bottom. Or my bad, not the bottom. The bottom should be 0.3 or higher. So if you change your contact depth to 0.2, this is where the model actually, or the supports actually reach your model. And so the way that the supports actually work is they dig into your model. So if we were to slice this down, bring it down right around here, you can see that that support actually sticks into the model itself. Um, and so generally 0.2 gives you enough to support the model, but also so that when you remove it, you don't leave dimpling on the surface of your print. For those of you who have successfully printed, a lot of the time you remove support structures and you end up with like these little like curves on the surface of your print, like these little round dents from everywhere the support was. If you lower to 0.2, that gets rid of, a good 99% of it, and fixes it a lot. I personally use heavy, the heavy supports for most that I do. The exception to that is I actually I print a lot of minis, especially bigger minis, in light, so that way I can have a higher density. Um, and peel them off faster. Uh, and so that would be the exception. But for like something like this, which is a ring I designed last night for my wife, um, I would just use heavy. And then a lot of people tell you to turn the skate off. Don't. Always use the skate. That skate is going to save you so much time when it comes to taking your prints off the bed, because it gives you a nice little lip that your bed platform scraper, your spatula that you use to take your print off, just pops right underneath that lip and just slides under really smooth and just takes that print off in, half a second. Uh, so I personally, I would disagree with a lot of the people who are saying don't use the skate, turn it off. Use the skate. It's amazing. Um, so hopefully that answers your question, Lakshmi, as far as, resin and then good settings to start off with. Uh, those are what I use, and to date, I think I've only had 3 total failed prints, and they were all due to um, me not thinking when I sliced. It was all down to me doing something incorrectly. It wasn't anything wrong with the printer. Um, so there's that. And so let's see here. Mario, what can you tell me about the printing of lithography? All right. So we can actually do this. Let me go ahead and adjust this so I can pull a web browser. So new source, media source, window, there we go. It does not like that. So I'll just go and capture a display. Perfect. Minimize that, get all that out of here. Then I will pull this over here. All right, so with lithos, what I generally do is there's an online software that I really should have bookmarked at this point, but I use lithofanemaker.com. And I personally like it because it takes the hard work out of everything, and it gives you amazingly detailed prints. Um, and and you just end up with an STL that works right away. So I have a tendency to do the lightbox maker. I like light boxes. My wife likes them. So the big thing is, you know, with this one you can choose. You just take your images and you import them in. So I'll just let's see here. Grab this guy, this guy, this guy. These are all prints that I've done, by the way. And then you can set your desired thickness. So let's see, depth, width, height. And this, if you scroll down, it'll actually show you exactly where it's clipping your photos for each one. And then so the estimated file size would be roughly 178. You pop in your email and then it'll let you download it as a zip. Since we're just going to do a single pane, we'll just go flat, and I will grab a cool grayscale image. I really like World War II, so I have a tendency to default to using World War II images. So if we pop that photo into here, which is on the desktop, and then we can actually crop it using our settings. So if I want to capture, as much of this width as possible, but keep it within the build area, I'm probably going to knock my height down to 80, and then change my width to about 115. And so that's going to capture the majority of the detail. Hey, how's it going, Alejandro? So that's going to capture the majority of the detail in your litho. So as you can see, like I'm getting everything from the tank over to, roughly the edge of this pole, which, for a lithograph like this, if I were going to display it, that is a really good, framing for the photo. You can choose your overhang angles, your thickness, all of that. This one's a nice easy one, so I'll just throw level up gmail.com. So that should just download it as a zip for me. Then we can go ahead and grab that zip and extract it. We'll just throw this on the desktop, and they are really kind, and they include a notepad file that actually lists all the settings that you selected. So if you need to make any tweaks, you can go back and just punch in all the same numbers that you used. It also tells you what photo you use, so that way you can just, right off the bat, you have everything on hand to reference to make small adjustments if you don't like the way it comes out. So we'll go ahead and go back to Cheeto Box here, and I will clear this build platform and import it for you. So there is a lot of people say a lot of different things when it comes to lithos, and how they should be printed, what's the best way to print it, and honestly, that kind of depends on the person. So if you're printing small and you can get it flat on the build platform, print flat. You're gonna get a litho that has a lot of detail and quality, um, and it's gonna print really fast because you print it flat. There's like no Z height to it whatsoever. Um, I tend to like lithos that are larger. I like to, you know, like if I were printing a keychain size litho, then that'd be perfect for this build plate. I'd lay it down flat. The majority of the time, I print it like an actual photo. something that I want to display. So in like a case like this, I'm just going to print it vertically and I'm going to let it sit on the bed. It's got a flat bottom. There's not really any need for support. We're only using a 60-degree overhang. The resin printer will handle that just fine. The biggest thing that you're going to want to check before you run it without supports is you're just going to want to slowly bring this down and start at the bottom and really zoom in here. And you're just going to want to make sure that everything is printed connected. You want to make sure that there's nothing that's like printing out into open space. And with a litho, there should not be. Everything should just slowly lift up, slowly build out, go in, but there should never be anything that's just sitting there floating in space. We're almost a quarter of the way through this one, and so far I'm not seeing anything. Um, for those of you who don't know, if you ever hear anybody reference the word islands, that's what they're talking about. Is just anything that's floating that might need support, because you don't want anything that's going to get exposed that's not attached to something. Otherwise, that's going to stick to your FEP, and you'll either end up with flattened portions of your print, or it could single-handedly cause a failure to print, and destroy your entire print that you worked hard on, depending on how big that island was before it got to the rest of the model. So I mean, you end up creating a thick enough hardened piece on the FEP, and then it attaches to the model and it just rips it all right off the supports. Um, so in this case, there's nothing floating. This right here would be ready to print. For lithos, I'm a 0.1 guy, especially if I'm doing anything with a tall Z height. I'm a 0.1 guy. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna notice any difference, me personally. I'm pretty sure I'm partially blind. But those of you who are like really gung ho about the detail, you can print at 0.02, you can print at 0.05. I personally don't notice a difference between 0.05 and 0.02, and the detail difference between 0.05 and 0.1 to me doesn't really bother me a whole lot if I'm printing something big. If I'm printing something small, I'm never going to print at 0.1. Um, you for like miniatures and stuff like that, that's going to be too tiny. But for a litho, I'd print at 0.1, and all I change when I switch to 0.1 is I change my layer height, and then I bump my bottom exposure time to 60 seconds. Especially if you're printing directly on the platform, change your bottom exposure time to 60 seconds. It'll save you a lot of time. And then usually 9 seconds is fine with me. Something like this that I want to make sure it doesn't fail and has, you know, plenty of time to expose and not break, I'll do 10 seconds. Just bump it up by a second. Um, if you're using an infill structure so that you can hollow your print, turn that off for a litho. You do not want to hollow litho. It needs to be solid. And then anti-aliasing, definitely turn off for lithos. After that, it's just slicing. And then it's going to be the same big thing. You're going to want to make sure you're bumping up your lift and retract speed to 300. Not only is it going to save you time, but it improves the quality slightly. At least I have personally found that. So this particular litho, I want to say it's probably about 3.5, 4 inches tall, and that is going to print in 3 hours. I'm actually going to save this because I am going to print this, and I will actually post this later today after I do print it. My printer's all the way upstairs though. I really need to get the wireless SD card. That would be really nice. I'd just yell upstairs to my wife and tell her to hit print. Alright, so tank photo, World War II. So another big thing that I see happening a lot, people will start printing and that print will just stop midway through the print and act like it finished the print, lift all the way up to the top of the print bed. That is due to this section right here when you're writing the file. So if you're saving directly to your flash drive or your SD card and that drive is full, Chidu Box does not currently have a way to process that error. So it just keeps writing and then tells you it writes successfully. Even though it didn't write the last portion of that data, And that's what is going on when those guys are getting, those prints where it prints, 3/4 of the way and then just stops and acts like it's finished. Um, I personally always write my files to my desktop and then drag it onto my flash drive that I plug into my printer. Uh, it's honestly the best practice. If you have the ability to do that, do that. That way you're ensuring that your file gets written fully, and when you go and copy that over onto the flash drive, if your flash drive is full, it's going to tell you, and you know to delete some stuff, and then you don't end up wasting a bunch of resin. Um, so let's see here. How hard is it to remove from the plate? So with a litho and printing directly to the plate, something flat like this, it can be rather difficult. But what I found is, so long as like if you have at least 2 millimeters of thickness touching the plate, 90% of the time you can literally just wear gloves. Let's emphasize this by wear gloves. But you can just, with your gloves on, you can grab the side of the sprint and just pop it off. I did that with the rooks. You want to you can apply a decent amount of force, but obviously be a little gentle. You don't want to just like go and try and snap it off, but the majority of these they'll just pop right off the plate. You don't really have to fight with them. Just add a little bit of pressure. So I have a friend named Robert who I've been helping him get his printer going, and he actually has a photon. But if you have some transparent resin and you're looking for something really cool to print, you can actually print this rather large at a diagonal, and it comes out amazingly detailed. And in transparent Elegoo red or transparent photon red, this comes out looking amazing. He just popped this off his printer. Let me switch here so I can see this. Um, I will post this down in the chat, but you can grab this off of Thingiverse, um, and it's a cathedral. It took him about 5 hours to print it, I want to say, with the settings that I gave him, printed at 0.1 layer heights, and it comes out amazing. So I will go ahead and grab that. Does anybody else have any other questions? I think I've answered everything that's been asked in chat so far. I'm streaming, just so you know. This is my beautiful wife. She's eventually going to cross in front of the camera. Yep. You didn't see Alright, where is this link? There we go. So there's the link to that cathedral print that I just showed. Okay, so give another couple of minutes, and then if nobody else has any questions, I'll go ahead and end the stream. Just because I'm really eager to go print this litho. I'm excited for this. Notre Dame. Is that Notre Dame? I think it's Rhymes Cathedral. I have no clue where that's at though. Oh, yeah, it is. It is the Notre Dame Cathedral. I'm actually slightly disappointed I didn't recognize that. Trevor, you have any 3D printed relating questions? I doubt it, but my times for drying and curing. Yes, I can. I can definitely do that. So I will actually pull up a photo of what I'm using to dry and cure my prints. I built a nice little custom workstation for it. Let's see. Don't switch. I want to say I posted it on Discord. Maybe I did not. I know I posted it somewhere. Alright, so I can't find the photo. Not a big deal. Oh, here it is. So the biggest thing with drying and curing is anytime that you have a print that has not cured completely, you do not want to touch it in bare skin. I'm going to reiterate that over and over again a million times until people realize don't touch your prints. It's a bad idea. You're going to hurt yourself. Um, So, one recommendation I always make off the bat, just because, it was a recommendation that was given to me, and the difference is night and day, is ditch the toothbrush. Um, Toothbrush is great when you first start printing, but it does not get all the resin off. I use isopropyl alcohol to wash my prints in, and when I first started, I was, shaking up my print inside of the isopropyl alcohol in a little bowl for anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes, pulling it out, letting it dry. You can usually air dry in roughly a minute. And then I bought a $25 ultrasonic cleaner off of Amazon. And in 2 minutes in the ultrasonic cleaner, it removes 10 times more resin than a toothbrush ever did. Um, so my first recommendation off the bat, buy an ultrasonic cleaner. It'll be the best $25 investment of your life. You will actually, uh, especially if you're working with minis. Like with me, with minis, I actually reprinted a few of the minis that I had printed before I got an ultrasonic cleaner to compare the two. And there were details that I didn't even realize that these prints had, um, that became noticeable after switching to an ultrasonic cleaner. Um, so I personally, I pull the print off the bed, pull the support off right away, depending on what the model is. For most things, I just remove the support before I clean it, just because it's easier to remove supports when they're soft and it does less damage. However, there are some things that are thin that you want to leave the supports on and cure, and it's just kind of one of those things that you feel out over time. Um, but like, I mean, if your print is really soft and it's flexing and it's still got supports on, cure it first, then remove your support with your snips. Um, but generally, what I do is after I pull it off the bed and I've removed supports, I put it into my ultrasonic cleaner. Uh, The best way to do that is to fill your ultrasonic cleaner with water and then put the isopropyl alcohol in a bag with your print and then put that bag in the ultrasonic cleaner. I don't do that. I'm going to switch to doing that because at this point I have so much like resin goo at the bottom of my ultrasonic cleaner that it it's nasty, and then I keep having to like wipe off the prints to get all the goop off. So what I generally do is I throw my prints into the ultrasonic cleaner for roughly 3 to 4 minutes. In that time, it blasts like the surface completely clean. After that, I let the print sit for roughly 2.5 to 3 minutes just to make sure that the IPA fully dries, and then I wipe it. I wipe it down with a microfiber cloth or a paper towel just to make sure that it is completely dry, and then I cure for 5 minutes. Now, the biggest thing about the actual curing is your curing time is going to depend on how good your UV light source is. You know, if you're using a curing box versus the sun, you're going to have different curing times. If you're, using a translucent or see-through resin versus something like black, white, or gray, you're going to have different curing times. Um, the biggest way to figure out whether or not your print is cured completely is just to, kind of feel the surface. If it's tacky and your gloves are kind of sticking to it and pulling off, your print's not finished curing. Um, there are some exceptions to that with the later, uh, with a few batch dates. You can find the post somewhere around on Facebook, but we're keeping track of the batch dates because we found that some batches of, for instance, the Elegoo Gray do not cure completely like normal, and so even fully cured, they're still a little tacky. Um, I want to say it was a 719 batch is the one that did that. But I'd have to honestly cross-reference that for sure. But generally, the way to know that your print is fully cured is if you can take your gloves, and you can touch that print, and your gloves aren't sticking to it, it's fully cured. For me, with the Elegoo Gray, 5 minutes under my UV LEDs in my home-built curing chamber, and it's completely cure. Uh, I think most people generally find that their prints are cure after about 3 minutes sitting in direct sunlight. Keep in mind that just because it's cloudy outside does not mean that there's not UV light. UV light passes through the clouds. Clouds are nothing to them. Um, and you're actually more likely to get a sunburn on a cloudy day than you are on a sunny day, just because those clouds actually essentially act like magnifying glasses for UV light. So keep in mind, you can still cure your prints on a cloudy day outside. Um, but depending on the weather, it could take, a couple minutes longer, or you could cure in half the time. So if you're curing in direct sunlight, you definitely want to keep an eye on your print, check it, and just make sure that you're not over curing it because the prints can become brittle, crack. You can get on the sides of the prints, you can get it like splitting open and things like that. So that's the biggest thing. Um, if you have hollow prints, just know it's, especially if you're printing hollow with a translucent color, you're gonna have to cure for longer. Um, Especially if you have resin trapped on the inside. The biggest no-no is having a hollow print and not adding drainage holes, because if you cure it, and that outside is completely clear, and then you just go pull it off, and oh well, it's done. No, it's not. Um, that resin is going to come back to haunt you. That's trapped on the inside about 2 weeks later, and your print's going to pop a hole in the side. Um, because when it's curing, it's expanding. So if you're hollowing out your prints to save resin, always add drainage holes, and it's really easy to do. It's this wonderful little dig hole here thing. Um, I generally do a 3 millimeter hole as it adds the best airflow. And your depth is just however deep you need to access it, and you want to make sure you have holes going all the way through. But you just do that, click add hole. If you're really worried about the cosmetic of it, um, you can check the keep the hole, and it will just throw that hole on the print bed, and it will print the part that it removed so that you can just shove it back in there when you're done. Um, But as far as cleaning goes, cleaning and drying, generally, you know, clean and your IPA or whatever it is that you're using to clean for 2 to 3 minutes, and then I let it dry for another 2 to 3 minutes, and then I cure it until it stops being tacky to the touch. That's honestly the best way to describe it. And like I said, ditch the toothbrush, get an ultrasonic cleaner. Anybody else have any questions pertaining to anything with the Mars or Chidu box or slicing? If you have a photon, I've become pretty versed at the photon too at this point, helping a lot of people with their photons. They're basically the same machine, but the Mars is better. That's just my opinion. Don't roast me for it. But to be fair, this is the Mars group. Make sure I don't forget my son at school. I should do more of these. I will try. I'm hoping to make it a regular thing. Um, I know I'm gonna start. I'm probably gonna start doing some YouTube stuff as well. I'm trying to expand what I'm doing. I, I I've been helping out in the background for a while, and I just recently switched to resin printing. Um, but I never actually like really thought about doing videos or anything like that due to work. And so that's kind of one thing I'm trying to transition into is putting my priority more towards what I love, and that's 3D printing and helping people in general. I mean, if you have questions about, even if it's not the Mars and it's not resin printing, like if you have FDM questions, I can probably help you. I mean, I started 3D printing several years ago, and I love it. I've been through so many printers. I've demoed printers for a few companies and tested them. It's 3D printing is my passion. Um, I happen to be more comfortable with resin printing as of late, just because it's all I do. Um, at this point, I don't own any FDM machines currently. Um, I am getting a couple, but resin printing has kind of become my obsession at this point. I love it. Um, it is so much more user friendly uh, than FDM. Uh, and not to knock FDM or anything, like FDM has its purposes, has its place. Like, if you're trying to do something crazy big, you're going to FDM. You're not going to do that on a resin printer. I mean, you can. You're going to print in really tiny parts, and it's going to it's still going to take a while, but it's also going to cost you a lot more money. So I'm definitely not knocking on FDM. It's also a great technology. Uh, Prusa is like the technology that he comes up with for the FDM printers in the i3 series is just, it blows my mind sometimes. Um, but I personally, I'm a resin fanatic. I love the Mars. Uh, Honestly, it's easily the best home resin printer on the market. Um, and it really just speaks to itself with the fact that there are so many people who just pull it out of a box, hit print, and you know create these beautiful works of art that you know I strive after. Um, and so just like really dialing in these machines and playing with them constantly, I love it. I've got a failed print that I need to go clean off uh, at some point, but it's really worth it to push the boundaries on these and just have fun. Like that's there's so much that you can do with them. There's no point to not have fun. Um, and if you're not having fun 3D printing, you can donate your 3D printer to me and I'll have fun for you. Because this hobby should be fun even when it's frustrating. Um, I know one thing I should point out is this right here. If you print this flat to the bed, or you print anything flat to the bed like this, where you have a large contact area that's going to be on the FEP while you're printing, this right here, this indent, that's suction. The moment this layer goes down right there at the bottom of that, you're creating a massive amount of suction. Um, you're also going to have a lot of resin trapped in here. So if you ever print a lithograph flat or anything that has an indentation and you're printing it from the print bed, just remember that that cavity is going to have a lot of trapped resin in it. And when you're taking that off the print bed, you're going to want to be careful and you're going to want to keep it over your vat if you want to use that resin. Otherwise, you're going to waste all the resin that's trapped in there. Um, the other big thing is if you're printing something like large like this that's going to take up the full print bed, obviously this would need to be scaled down because it's too large, which is really easy to do. I'm pretty sure 80% should make that fit exactly. So if you're printing the full bed, I know some people have said that they have like this weird like 5 millimeter fade zone. Um, I don't have that. If you do, uh, Fusion 360 takes like 3 minutes. Just make a little flat piece that's like half a millimeter thick and is the exact dimensions of your screen for your print area, and then extrude it up and bring it in, uh, half a millimeter or a millimeter, and then do the same thing a couple of times so you create this, small tiered block, and then go through that on your printer and run it, and you'll be able to count the steps. So if you're, if you did, 1 millimeter increments and you have 6 tiers, you should have 6 steps. Go throw that on your printer, you print it off. If you're only getting 5 steps, you know that you're getting some kind of fading on that last millimeter, and you can really figure out that way exactly where your issue is. As far as your screen, it's a great way to test and see if maybe the pixels are dead, because while there is the exposure test that you can do and it shows you that beautiful little rectangle and you know that your screen is working efficiently, that doesn't tell you what the dead pixels are on the outside of your screen. um, I know some people have issues towards the outside of the screen. I personally don't. I can print all the way up to the edge of my print area and be perfectly fine. Um, there are some things like if I wanted to trim the edge off of this, I would just print it larger than the print area, because it's only gonna print to the edge of the print area anyway, and I end up with that that smooth line all the way up the top. But that it's a great way to kind of find out and really figure out what your bed size is. That said, Elegoo does offer a 1 year warranty on their stuff. Um, Regardless of whether you get it through Amazon or My Mini Factory, who has a really great deal going on because you can get resin and minis with them for, you know, cheaper than it would cost to buy resin and minis. Um, regardless of which one of the outlets you order through, Elegoo is really good. Sometimes their support can be a little bit slow in responding back, but generally, if you have any defects within the first year, your screen breaks, your stepper motor stops working, your lead screw arrives bent, contact them. They're really good. They'll take care of you. They'll get you that replacement part that you need. Um, I know. I think it's Shivanand. I can't ever figure out how to say his name. He has a really great YouTube channel. It's amazing. He posts, 2-minute tip videos regularly. He has this like wonderful series that I love called "Did It Fail," where he takes, prints that other people are having difficulties with, and he slices it, shows you how he, sliced it, and did the supports, and you get to see whether or not that worked or that failed. I've learned a lot from him. Um, and so I would definitely recommend, checking him out as well. Definitely check out his YouTube. Um, but there's a lot of resources for learning, uh, and a lot of the things that I'm finding, are fixed relatively easy. I think Shiva is actually the one who's making the video on how to do. It's either him or one of the admins is doing the video on how to replace your LCD screen. Um, I don't know what the time frame is on that. I saw a mention of it a few days ago. Um, and so, you know, the there shouldn't be anything about these machines that you're intimidated by. They're really simple. Um, you know, they to me they really are the perfect printer. Um, even if you get one that has some dead pixels on the edge, it's really not that hard to change out an LCD screen. If you get resin on your screen and you kill it and you get a new one, it's not that hard to change. Don't be afraid to take apart your printer. Like, as much as 3D printing is about 3D printing and learning and printing these amazing cool things, do not be intimidated by your machine. Do not be afraid to take it apart. I mean, learn your machine as much as you learn how to slice your prints, and as much as you print. Uh, the more you know about it, the more you'll be able to do, and eventually, you'll be able to help people, and you'll be able to pass on that knowledge. Um, uh, I know that there. I'm trying to think of who it is, but there's somebody coming out with some decent like maintenance videos and all that. It's not just the LCD one. Let me look that up real quick. I'm pretty sure it's either Shivanand or the admin. Let's see here. If I find it, I will go ahead and post the link in the chat so that people can follow that conversation. I can't seem to find it at the moment, um, but uh, I will definitely find it and get it posted for you guys. Does anybody else have any other questions or? Let's see here. I'll wait to see if anybody else has any questions. So I did design this ring last night, and if anybody wants it, I will post it on Thingiverse and share it here in a bit. I have not printed it yet, though, just so you know. Um, my wife wanted a ring, and I wanted to experiment with this, so I actually designed a nice little clover ring in Fusion 360. Um, and it has these beautiful little inlay slots, and I include the inlay rings as well. So if you have a couple different color resins, I'm going to print the inlay rings in translucent red, and then I'm probably going to do the ring itself in gray, just because I only have translucent red, gray, and clear at the moment. But I'm gonna go ahead and release these files on Thingiverse, and I'll share them in the group just in case anybody wants to print it. It's just a nice little simple 4-leaf clover pattern. I think it's size dimensions 10.5, but it's really easy to scale. You can just go here, and that is what you want. So the diameter of this is 3 millimeters thick. So the inside diameter of this is 22.2 millimeters. And so if you look up the ring size, you would just take the ring size and add 3 millimeters to it, and you can resize it to whatever size you need for your particular fingers or your wife's fingers. And then all you got to do is throw it on there. The support's really easy. These rings, you can honestly just rotate 90 degrees and print them flat on the bed. They do not need support. They're really simplistic. I would personally add some support to the bottom though, just so that way you can get them off the print bed without breaking them. And then you would want 2 of these, and use the auto arrange button, and boom, ready to go. That's it. It's that simple. These are so simplistic that you're not going to have any islands you need to worry about. They're just going to print, and I'm going to print them at 0.1, so might as well slice this now while I have the opportunity. Let's see here. What do I consider the ideal support settings? Sorry if I already covered that. I just joined. That's perfectly fine. I will go ahead and slice this. So since I've already started slicing this and you're asking about support settings, I will just go ahead and finish slicing this, and then I will pull in a more advanced model that would actually require a decent amount of support, and then kind of start from there. All right. My wife's gonna love that. All right, so let's find something. I've got a folder full of D&D stuff in here. Here we go. This one will be fun to slice. Let's scale them up a bit. So we'll make it 80 millimeters tall. Perfect. All right. So this file is available on Thingiverse. I like it because it's funny. It's a banana D&D mini. The Banana Knight. All right, so this is actually a good one. For the purposes of support, you've got plenty of overhangs. I think this thing actually has a couple of islands we can look at. So for support settings, I'm different than Shivanand. He swears by light supports. He only prints with light supports. I can't figure out light supports except for a few prints. The majority of the time when I print with light supports, they fail. So I tend not to use them. If I do print with light supports, I always do a density of 100%, to maximize the amount of area that it's automatically applying supports, just to make sure that I have enough support on that model that it's not going to fail. Me personally, I use heavy supports and a 50 to 60% density. For most things, you don't really need to go over it unless it's like a really crazy, lots of overhang, lots of 90-degree angles, lots of islands. At that point, high suction, definitely if it's going to be a high suction piece, I'll bump the density up to 100. But for something like this, 50% is probably fine. Contact depth, I always do 0.2. I learned this from my buddy Yordi, who has been printing for significantly longer than I, and actually got into resin printing several months before I did. He was actually one of the main influencers in me getting the Mars. But he found out that if you put your contact depth to 0.2 millimeters, it adds enough depth that your print is fully supported and won't pull off the build plate. while also being easy enough that you can pull off these supports and not dimple your print. So you'll get a lot better print quality and post processing quality with a 0.2 millimeter depth. Um, because you won't have any of that dimpling or surface deformation. So the biggest thing is if we look at this model from the bottom, anywhere that you see red is going to be an area where you really need to focus on supports. Those are going to be the areas that are going to have the most difficulty and are going to be the most stressful for the print. So in this case, you know, obviously this entire bottom part, since we're not printing flat to the bed because we need support up here, uh, we have the bottom of the banana, the bottom of the shield, bottoms of the arms, a couple of these armor plate locations, and the tops of these banana peels. Um, so something like this, I'd go heavy support. You know, I'm using the default contact shape. I don't like the spheres. When you use the spheres, you have a better chance of dimpling. Um, so I connect with the cone. I generally, 0.6, 1.53, just the default actual settings for them. All I adjust is either density and or the contact depth. Um, something like this, 90% of the time, auto add support, you're fine. Um, however, for like instance, this section right here, you want to support out to the edge. You see a lot of prints that have like deformation on the edges, and a lot of that is caused by not properly supporting the print. And so with the few supports that were there, there's a good chance that this would have drooped a little or sagged or cured incorrectly, and that's just because it wasn't printed and supported very well. So anything that sticks out, super far like that, or anything that has a decent sized overhang, I always add a few extra supports, especially if it's above 70 degrees uh, when it's sticking out. You usually want to add more. Um, supports can be annoying, but they're easy to place. Just click, uh, and you want to make sure when you're placing them, try and get them as many of these red areas as possible. The more of these red areas you take care of, the higher the chance that you are going to succeed in your print, and the lower the chances that you're going to fail. Um, a lot of people say, oh, print minis at 45-degree angles. That is great. It's going to reduce suction. A lot of the time, it's not needed. Uh, in a situation like this, the base of my mini is taking up easily half of my build plate in volume. That's a massive amount of suction while that prints. Something like this, you would want to rotate 45 degrees. Um, I'm not planning on actually printing this, so I'm not, but for the sake of, kind of showing what it would look like, we just go in here on the X, 45 degrees. It's going to kill your support. And then 10 degrees on the Y. Since this is, a pretty vertical model, you kind of want to break it up a bit. And so this is going to minimize, if we kind of like look at this by layers, like it's minimizing what's actually printing at any given time. You're not ending up with any like super large, majority of the build plate areas. It just prints. You don't have to worry about suction at that point. Um, and then same thing with these settings. It's automatically going to apply to the majority of the areas. And if you look at this from the bottom now, you can see there's nowhere near as much stress points on this print as there was. Since this is a relatively large, base, I would still go in and add more support. You want to try and do your support in ways that you get these frames, because it's going to add more strength to your support. So something like this, that's probably overkill for the bottom side of this print, but it's also going to prevent warping. Um, It's going to make sure that it, prints all the way out to that edge correctly. You don't have to worry about any sagging surfaces. And then, it's the same thing, just wherever you see like a lot of this red, just make sure you're supporting it, as best as you can. You can zoom in and, really get in there if you need to add supports. Stuff like even in cavities like this, it's really not that hard to remove support. Um, so don't be afraid to like put support in places because you think you might not be able to remove it. You can take your snips and just pop it through there, or take toothbrush, toothpick, and you can pop most supports off, especially with the 0.2 contact depth. You're just going to be able to poke it, they'll fall right out. Biggest thing, when you're supporting is dark red areas. Give it a little bit extra support. If you find a dark red area that doesn't have support, add support. So like right here, this has red, not a single support. I'm going to throw a support on there, just make sure that that prints correctly. So once you think you have your support good, the last thing you're going to want to check, bring your model all the way down, and then just kind of looking at it from the top, we're going to watch where each layer is placed. So here is that first part of the print. Want to make sure it's not an island. Okay, we know that we have at least one contact point on this. It's a red area. I'm just going to throw an extra contact point out on the edges just to make sure it's, this is the start of your print. Make sure it's fully supported. The majority of the print is building off of that spot. Have a good base. Because this right here, this is going to be the highest stress portion of your print. Because as this increases, all that suction is pulling off of that initial 4, plus, as you get to these other supports, it starts to help. But in that first initial stage, you want to make sure that you have good support. So we just bring it up, just kind of keep looking. Biggest thing you're looking for is you are checking to see if you see anything that's, just floating in the air and doesn't have a support underneath it. That's called an island. So like if we look right here, if this support wasn't right here, this little bit right here would be an island. I think I indirectly actually added that support preemptively, but and so you're just kind of going to go slowly layer by layer. You got another one right here. It's supported. And you just want to make sure that there's no point in your print where there's something printing out in space and not having, a support stuck to it. And at this point, everything's done. So this would actually be fine to print at this point. You've got support. There's no islands. The odds of this failing are really low. If you were to print this right now and it failed, something's wrong with your slicing settings at that point. Whether it be underexposure, overexposure. If this were to rip off the supports at this point, my initial guess, like I would automatically assume you're underexposing your resin because your supports aren't strong enough to actually stay connected, especially with the heavy support. If this model's ripping off, you don't have any islands that are going to block the FEP. So long as you're using, a FEP that's cleaner, hasn't had a fail print on it off it recently, that print's going to be successful. And I mean, you can print that comfortably and walk away. And so long as you don't run out of resin, you can come back when that's done, and it's going to be finished. And then for me, like I said, it's bigger than the average mini. I'd be printing that at 0.1. And I think at this point I might actually print it. But I am going to go back because when I print this big, where are you at? I like to hollow my stuff. So there's a cool trick when printing with heavy supports. If you're hollowing your print, So long as your wall thickness is 1.5 millimeters or higher, after you clean your print, you leave the support on, throw your print in your ultrasonic cleaner or shake it up in your IPA, get it really good and clean. Um, then get some hot water. Like take a bowl of water, put it in the microwave for like 45 seconds, just hot to the touch, not enough to like burn yourself. Throw your print in there for about 20 seconds, and with that 0.2 millimeter contact depth, this will come off like butter. They just peel right off, don't leave any scarring. It makes support removal a heck of a lot easier. On top of it already being easier because of the optimized contact depth. Um, but if you're looking for a fast, like great way to remove supports, if you're printing with heavy supports, your wall thickness is 1.5 millimeters or thicker, or you're printing solid, and your contact depth is low, you can throw this in some warm water and just peel it off. Um, you can cure this. You could cure this completely solid. At this point, like with a 1.5, if I were to do this in gray, I could cure it completely through. My supports are going to be hardened. I could still go throw this in some water and peel that off like butter. Um, so that is the great thing. And so when you're hollowing, the biggest thing is you want to find out where your hollow points are. So I know that I'm hollow all the way down through the body. I know that hollow connects. My base is hollow. So what I would do is I'd come over here and I'm going to throw this hole for drainage in a place where it's not really going to bother me. And if I go down here, if I really wanted to patch that hole and just use the part that I cut out, it'll do that for me because it just takes that piece, puts it right here, it'll print on the bed, and then you just shove it in there when you're done. I don't ever do that. I just patch it. So throw that there. Since this will be upside down on the print bed like that, that'll allow your resin that is inside of your body of your model to just drain out. It'll come out this hole, drip down to the end of the banana, and then pour back in. And then since I know that this is also hollow, I'm going to... Alright, so the center will work fine. I'm just going to go ahead and shorten this up a bit. And I'm going to pop a hole right here. Not deep enough. Go down a bit and increase the length. There we go. And so now I've got a hole in the base. So all the the areas that I have hollowed out cavities in now have a way to drain. I'm not going to lose any resin. Um, I'm not going to have any resin stuck inside my print that is, going to a couple weeks from now cure from, you know, being out laying about or being shown off that's then going to cause the model to expand and split and break. Uh, so most prints you can do it with just the one hole. On a lot of prints I usually add a second hole in each area that allows air to flow through, so that way as it's draining it's easier. But for something like this, when I print, most of my prints end up sitting on the build plate for a while after they finish, so it gives plenty of time for it to drip out and for the air to make its way in there and force it all out. And whatever's not out of there, by the time I throw it into the ultrasonic cleaner, it's going to get blasted out of there, filled with IPA, redrained out, and I'm never going to notice it, never going to have a problem. And then you can use wood putty, you can use epoxy, you can use resin. There's a million different ways you can patch these holes in a way that you'll never even notice it, and then prime and print your mini, or prime and paint your mini. I can't speak. So since I have that all done, I'm gonna slice this for my 0.1 layer height. Uh, just because it's so big, I don't really like I even at a 0.1 layer height with this being pixelated. Um, make sure my anti-alias is on and then reslice that because that anti-aliasing will actually smooth out a lot of these pixels so you don't get triangle-y stuff. But even at a 0.1 layer height, I'm still going to retain all of this detail. There's no like really super fine details anywhere on here that warrant me slicing at a lower height. Um, so honestly, with this, the the only thing I would achieve by slicing this at a lower height, um, due to the size of the details on this, would be just to increase my print time. Um, you know, if I had like a bunch of like really intricate tiny details in here, that are actually really small, that are smaller than my layer height, then stepping it down a bit at that point would be worth it. If I were printing this at regular size, where we're actually a 28 millimeter mini, I'd be printing this at 0.05 because at 0.05 I'm going to capture all that detail. Um, at 0.1, I would lose most of this detail if this was its original size, but since I scaled it up, 0.1 is going to more than cover it. Don't be afraid to, slice at a higher setting just to see, the difference. Like once you've got a decent amount of prints under your belt and, you're used to slicing, you can tell the difference between, um, what height you actually need to print at. Like there are some people who would be like, oh, print that at 0.02, blah, blah, blah. You're going to get so much detail. No, you're not. You're going to get the same print that I'm going to get at 0.1. Um, don't you know? Don't waste your time. That's more time that you can be printing. If you don't need to print it, smaller to capture the detail that you're wanting to capture, don't print it smaller. Print it at what's necessary to get the detail you're looking for. All the detail on this, I'm gonna get at 0.1, and I will post it later. Once it prints, and I will prove it. I can print both of these today, so both this and the ring and the litho. So, and then big thing, lift speed, retract speed, set to 300. So this is only going to take me 3 hours to print. If I slice this at a lower setting, for each increment that you step down, if I print this at 0.05, that's going to jump to like 5 hours. If I print this at 0.02, that's going to jump to like 12 hours. Um, and so that's why it's important. Slice at the height that is necessary, but don't slice smaller when it's unnecessary. It's going to save you resin. It's going to save you time. I mean, if you're going to bed and you don't want your print sitting there all night and you just want it to run and actually take all night and you're doing it on purpose, slice at the lower setting. I think that's redundant. Um, the biggest thing that I see is people worried about letting their print sit overnight. Your resin's going to be fine sitting in your vat. It's not going to go bad. It's not going to get overly exposed. It'll be fine. Um, Why print diagonally instead of just straight up and down as if it has a flat base? So since it has a flat base, if this currently, I scaled this up. If this was a 28 millimeter mini and I was printing it at its correct scale, you can print it flat. It's not going to make a difference. Um, but since I scaled this up, this base takes up half of my print bed. It's using roughly half the area of my actual print bed. That is a massive amount of suction. Um, and so when you have high levels, like when you have parts that are taking up, 30, 40, 50% of your print bed, angle them. This minimizes the contact area. So rather than having just this massive, huge, um, high stress area that's going to be pulling on your support because this model needs supports, rather than having this huge high stress area that's becomes a massive risk for point of failure because of your because of suction. If we look at it now, at any given moment, that is roughly the largest volume that is going to be touching my printer. There's never anything large that is pulling against my FEP. Whereas if I print this flat, I have, I have the suction of half my print bed being pulled on my FEP. Um, One, that's going to stretch your FEP over time. Your FEP's going to go out a lot faster. You're going to have to change it more frequently. But two, you're reducing a point of failure. Suction is a point of failure. Anytime you create suction, the more suction there is, the more support you need, the higher the risk of fail. Um, Something like this, like I've reduced, I can 110% say comfortably that I know I'm going to put this on my printer. I'm going to walk away. I'm going to come back 3 hours later. It's going to be done and it's going to be perfect. And that's because I've reduced the point of failures. I've made sure that the model is supported in all of the areas that produce the most stress on the supports. I've made sure to support large areas as much as possible. I have checked this and made sure that there's no islands that could potentially interfere. I've reduced and eliminated as many points of failure as I possibly could. Um, and so that's when you see people saying, "Oh, print it diagonally," tilt it 45 degrees. Sometimes yes, you really do want to do that because you're creating high suction. But for something like a 28 millimeter mini that's taking up, that like even the largest highest suction area is taking up maybe 5% of your base. I can print 12 minis all at once. So, it's not taking even its biggest suction spot is not that large. If you're worried about it, use heavy support, use a lower contact depth so you don't get as much dimpling on something small. Like I printed this with, heavy supports at 0.05 and I printed it straight up and down. I did not rotate it. There was no need. You're not creating suction, you're not creating a point of failure. Your supports are going to hold. But, if I'm printing something this large where I have a 50% area suction, rotate, 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 rotate. Reduce your points of failure. That's the biggest thing. Resin printing is easy. It really is. Like once the these machines literally just take care of themselves. We no longer have to, figure out whether we're using hairspray or Elmer's glue or all these weird things that we had to put on the beds with FDM. We don't have to sit there and watch that first layer to make sure that it actually sticks. We don't have to do these overly complicated leveling processes. These are really just hit play and walk away. And all it comes down to is when you slice, so long as your build plate is level, and so long as your screen and your hardware itself is good, like if your FEP is good, your screen isn't failing, your stepper motor still works, and your bed is level, it comes down to slicing and reducing points of failure. You reduce your points of failure, you're going to have a perfect print every single time. Do you have a link to the Monopoly coins? I can actually pull them up and pop them in the slicer and we can find out. I was able to put 36 of them on the plate area, but I think they're very prone to fail. Do the support bases produce as much suction as the base would? Um, yes and no. So the way that these support bases work is yes, they do technically create as much suction. However, in our settings, let me save this real quick so I can back out because I do want to print this. Where did I put the other one? Well, let's move you to the desktop and save you there so I can just copy these all over later. So yes, your support base is going to produce as much suction. However, your first, 5 to 10 layers, you are exposing at, 3 to 5 times longer than the rest of your print. Um, like it's hardened like a rock and it's essentially glued to that print bed. That's why you rarely see your support base ripping off the build platform. Um, and while it's great for the support base, You never want to do that for your entire print. Like, okay, yeah, I could reduce failures by overexposing the entirety of my print, but I'm also going to lose all that detail. And so it's that's why you don't see the base ripping off, is because we don't have any detail. All its job is there to do is to hold on to the supports and to hold on to the bed. Um, so if we look at our slicer settings, for me personally, I only do 5 bottom layers at a ridiculous exposure time. So for a 0.1 mini, I overexpose by 6 times more than my exposure time, because I'm exposing each layer for 10 seconds. My bottom layers, I'm doing 60 seconds a piece. At 0.05, I'm doing 30 and a 9-second exposure time. That's just what works best for the particular resin that I have. That's where I found is my sweet spot, and I get my best prints. Um, but at 60 seconds, even though you have that suction, it's not coming off. It's glued to the build plate, and you have your after that, there is no further suction after that. Like the rest of this, I mean, you have just a bunch of tiny little pegs coming up. Um, Even distributed, there's never really large amounts of suction on my FEP for the entire rest of the print. I've minimized that. Um, since this is such a large thing, you know, um, the only real suction during the print is the overexposed base, and that's negated by the fact that we're overexposing it and it's essentially gluing itself to the build plate. Jorge, if you have a link to the Monopoly coins that you can post, I would be more than happy to pull them in there and we can take a look at them and find out uh, if the Monopoly coins are flat on one side. You could print them without support and just print them directly to the build plate. They're going to be a little bit harder to take off, especially if they're thinner. Um, but at that point, you could print them flat. The first 5 layers or however many layers of it are going to be overexposed to glue it to the build plate. And honestly, if it's a flat bottom and there's no real detail on the sides, other than like, I don't know, like maybe like how you get the lines on the side of a quarter, um, you that's perfectly fine. Just lay them flat, throw them on the build plate, they'll print just fine. Um, Even if you're printing 36 of them. Uh, However, if they're tiny and they're really thin, because I'm guessing that they're tiny and really thin, if you can put 36 of them on one plate, um, I would print those on support and I would angle them 45 degrees so that you can have um, so that you don't have like a massive just like suction field on your FEP pulling up all at once. Because when you're printing in bulk like that, um, especially 36 of them, they're all going to be relatively close together. So you're getting this distributed suction that's placed evenly on the build plate. And so while all of them might not fail, you might end up with some of them that do. And so that would be, can't send the link, don't know why. Is it on Thingiverse? Monopoly coin. Is it the Monopoly Gamer replacement coins? These little yellow things. All right. Yes, it is. All right. So let's go ahead and delete that now that we've covered that. And let's look at these Monopoly coins. So I just grabbed the number 5 coin. I don't know how you got 30 of these on a bill plate. These things are huge. Let's go ahead and delete some of these. Boom. There we go. Now I'm within the confines. So with these, you do have some text on the bottom. And if you're printing them at full size, like I am on this build plate. I probably wouldn't. If you need to print these in bulk, what I would do would be this. Print them at full size. Rotate them to like 80 degrees. You're still reducing, your point of contact. You're really minimizing it. You're also going to use a lot less support, but if we clone it, now I can get 28 on here. And if I just go in here, throw support, this is only going to need support from the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that that's on and press all, even though it's not going to need all. Oh, oops. Make sure to select all when you go to do your support if you're trying to do it all at once. So on these, the only real point of failure is this bottom. And 3 heavy supports per, plus these little 2 in the front, is probably more than enough. The biggest thing would just be looking at how it looks when you're printing. So let's go to the widest point, which is roughly right here. That is all the suction you're taking. If you take that, distribute it across the entire build plate, you've got maybe 10%. From Wootopia. Oh. Monopoly. The only one I'm finding on Thingiverse is the one that I'm using right now. I don't see anything from Wootopia. Let's Google it. Yeah, I'm not finding it. If you PM me, but basically the same concept applies. These are honestly so thin, and even at volume, each individual one isn't pulling a whole lot of suction, and even though it's still going to be distributed suction across all of these, you have heavy supports down here, and each one has 3. You have the support of the raft. The odds of this failing are really small. We even added a slight degree of tilt to kind of minimize how much what's it called? Minimize how much space it's taking, and how much of a cross section we're getting on the FEP. But even like this, at its widest point, you've got 4 points of contact, 5 points of contact actually, including a bridge. So at the highest point of suction, we have an extremely structurally sound base. These are not going to rip off. These are heavy supports. If you were really worried about it, you can bump the density up to 100%, replace these, hit OK, and now we've massively increased it. I personally, I would test this at 50 before I go to 100, just because I'm cheap. I don't like to waste resin. However, I can guarantee at 100%, 100% support density, like this is the resin difference is negligible. These will print perfectly every single time right off the bat. You've got a 10-degree tilt. That with this there's not really a cross section to begin with, but we're still we're decreasing it by just a little. How big are the details on this? Oh, yeah. See, and like this, there's virtually no detail on here. There's no reason to even lower this. I'd print this at 0.1. I mean, we're talking milliliters or millimeters of of size for every single change in detail difference. Printing at 0.1 layers is going to pick up all of this. So if I slice this, I should have disabled hollowing because there's no point and it's not even going to be able to. And now it's checking itself 28 times over and over. The photon validator and Shido box to work up better supports. So I personally don't use the photon validator. I don't really find a need to. Photon validator is great if you want to check to see if you have any islands. If you are worried about it, I mean definitely use it. It'll automatically, check your print and make sure that you don't have any islands. Um, However, I personally prefer to just check them manually. I will look at it slowly, layer by layer. Honestly, if you start from the bottom and slowly come up, it's easy to tell. Uh, you can see exactly where your print's starting off. I know that on my first layer right here, it's supported. If I zoom in here, it's printing on a support. It's extremely supported. As I bring it up, it's getting more contact points before, anywhere it could possibly need support, it's getting support. With more complicated models like the previous one that I showed, I already showed, I did show people how to look, layer by layer. I mean, it only takes a couple of minutes. The photon validator might save you a little bit of time. I just find it easier. I tend not to trust software. Um, it's Will I ultimately miss something at some point? Probably, but that piece that I miss is probably going to be so small that I'm never going to notice it. Um, just check. It, it doesn't take that long. A lot of the time you can check it by hand. Now, if I was printing a super crazy, super complex model that has like a bunch of support, and I'm trying to check areas in between that support, bottom up. That support's not going to get in the way. You can see everywhere. It is. Just go layer by layer. Um, if you're trying to find islands, any other way, you're probably not going to find them. Like even going from the bottom up, you're never going to find them because you're not seeing where it's printing. Um, it takes maybe a minute to just kind of scroll through slowly and identify anywhere an island is and just throw a support on it. Photon validator is great, especially for people who have difficulties navigating, the Chidu Box workspace, and for them, I would highly recommend it because it's going to find those islands and it's automatically, for the most part, going to fix them for you. Anything that it can't fix, it's going to tell you where it's at. Um, I personally don't use it. Uh, and yeah, and then as far as Chidu Box goes, I covered pretty in depthly how to. Let's do this. I'm not waiting 5 years for it to try to hollow a million coins. For Cheetah Box, prior to this, I went in pretty in depth into how to play support and check for islands. Make sure that all of your points of failures are covered. So for these 28 coins, I mean, 100% infill. I mean, it's a negligible cost. Um, Hour and 5 minutes. And it's another thing. I know that I can walk up, hit print, walk away, come back in an hour, it's done, and they're all there. Versus if I tried to print this flat, um, the the size of the individual like vacuums that are going to be created against the FEP are just so large. One, I'm not going to be able to print nearly as many, and two, I'm going to be introducing a lot more suction than I would otherwise. Um, and so while some of them might come out, probably going to get a lot of failure. Um, Photon validator. So for those of you who might want to use the photon validator, by default it works with our files. They it's updated regularly. It supports our Cheeto box files. I'm going to go ahead and just post that in the chat for the people who need it. Or the people who, just if you're in a rush, I suppose. So generally when I print, I'm not printing when I'm like in a hurry. Um, if I'm in a hurry, I'm not thinking about printing, but I posted a link to the Photon file validator. I mean, if you're in a rush and you have enough time to slice it and get most of the supports done, and you want to like give it that quick check over because you didn't have time to check to see if there were any islands, file validator would probably be great in that situation because you can just throw it in there. Oh, okay, it's good. Hit print and walk away. Um, I prefer to check it by hand. You know, uh, we're dealing with geometry, uh, and the analysis of that geometry. I prefer to visually do it rather than um, trust and hope that the software analyzed the geometry correctly and found that. Uh, but I'm weird. I'm weird. I prefer to check manually. I want to know 100% for sure that I've gone over this and I know it's going to print. Um, so that's just my big thing. I'll probably try out the photon file validator at some point. I personally don't use it in my workflow. Um, it works for a lot of people, so it's definitely something I would recommend because a lot of people save time and um, save prints by just popping it in there and not having to deal with islands. Anybody else have any questions? Alrighty, so since I'm not seeing any more questions, I'm just gonna take this opportunity just to thank you guys for popping into the stream, asking questions. I'm gonna try and do this once a week, so that I can answer people's questions as they come up with them, and just kind of help push the community farther, help the new people who are just trying to get into it, who are getting frustrated and struggling. 3D printing should be fun. Resin printing should be fun. Um, and like I said earlier in the stream, like if you're not getting enjoyment from 3D printing, there that that sucks. Um, you can feel free to donate your printer to me, and I'll get enjoyment from it. But when you're just starting out, it can be frustrating. Don't give up. Don't give up. There's plenty of people like me, Shivanon, and his YouTube channel. There's tons of resources and information you can go to. You can always feel free to shoot me a private message, and if I can help you, I will. Um, otherwise, yeah, probably every Wednesday, um, at some point, I will do a stream. And just feel free to ask me any questions that you have. We can kind of go over it on screen live and just kind of break it down and go from there. And then just so you guys know, if any of you guys are artists and you model your own stuff and 3D print it a lot. Um, there is a post somewhere in the group here recently from Alejandro with a Google form link to sign up potentially to be selected for some free resin. Definitely check it out. I know I did. Um, but hey, free resin. Uh, go click the link and give it a shot. Uh, if I do happen to get selected and get a bottle of the free resin, I will I'll post some prints and let you guys know if it's any good. Um, but I doubt they'd be willing to give it away if it wasn't. So uh, that said, you guys have a wonderful day. I'm gonna go get my son from school and eat dinner. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to private message me at any point. I'm always happy to help. You guys have a good day.